War has taken many forms throughout human history. Once a conflict between two nations and militaries, from metallic weaponry to rockets and bullets being propelled faster than the speed of sound. Technology continues to allow for more efficient termination of enemy forces. However, these technological advances bring another list of casualties never before seen on such a large scale: civilian casualties. How did this come to be? When did war change from a conflict between two nations' armed forces to the assault of civilian centers and populations? Has war ever brought good to the people of planet Earth? This is what we seek to solve today through the examination of conflicts and their lasting effects when looking at three greater regions. These regions being the Americas, Europe, and Asia. This examination will end with an exercise of thought on how these conflicts may soon go global, what we can do to stop it. Wars throughout human history can be attributed to 8 categories. These categories being ideology, territory, economic, resources, revenge, culture, religion, and geography. Now we will be taking a deep dive into the European continent. Religion has also played a factor in wars throughout Europe. With the Reconquista of the Iberian Peninsula in 1491, many Moors and Islamic people would be forced to flee to northern Africa, convert to Catholicism, or be executed for their Muslim religion. The reconquest of Iberia would lead to the mistreatment of many as they were seen as different and or inferior to the Spanish. Geography has also played a factor in war for many times. As the Russian Empire wished to spread its influence eastward, it would push all the way to the Pacific Ocean. However, their western frontier was still left mostly unguarded as it was full plains, meaning it would be easy for invaders to invade. This has led to many wars and many conflicts over the Russian Empire trying to spread west so it can get a natural border with its European enemies. Ideology has also been a cause of wars in the past for Europe. This is not only limited to the Nazi Germany and the Communist Soviet Union. The people inside of the country would also endure many crimes as they were part of the nation. Jews, gypsies, gays, Africans, and many others would be terminated in labor camps under Nazi Germany and Hitler's rule during World War II. This clash of ideologies would lead to the death of 40 million to 50 million people. However, the battle of ideology would soon be expanded from more than just Europe, as the Cold War would start soon after between communism and democracy, or East and West. Present Europe is the home to one war, this war being between the Russian Federation and Ukraine. This war can be described as being from a territorial dispute or revenge. This is because, after the fall of the Soviet Union, Russian leader Putin believes that the Russian regions of Ukraine rightfully belong to the Russian Federation.
Conflicts of today, and certainly when you look at what's happening just on the surface level between the Ukraine and Russia right now, one would argue that nationalism has played a role, and not in a positive fashion, right? Because it has prompted Russia to claim a certain nationalistic over people that also claim their own national, and that is a separate entity, and so that has driven a wedge.
However, the Ukrainians do not believe this, and they believe that their international integrity should be withheld. On February 24, 2022, the Russian Empire led an invasion into Ukraine. This led to the Ukrainian government mass mobilizing the civilian population and giving them arms. However, men in between the ages of 18 to 60 were forced to stay. However, those able to leave and flee to neighboring Europe are given all that they may need. And at the German station in Berlin, they are offering free tickets to anyone to flee anywhere within to the European Union. The future of Europe isn't all sunshine and rainbows, however, as territorial disputes between Serbia and many of the ex-Yugoslav republics could cause a war in the future. Religion could also be a cause, as Greece and Turkey haven't been the best friends due to historical reasons, and a religious war may break out between the two Orthodox and Islam states. Resources, including the growing oil crisis, could spread to European nations to conquer these resources in the Middle East. Or, as green energy continues to grow, the needs for different resources may cause a battle in the future. Ideology could also be a problem for the future of Europe, as communism and fascism are seen to be on the rise. Poland has fascist nationalist parties taking control in their government, and once again, communism is rising in the Russian Federation.
regimes such as Mr. Putin's, which has eliminated domestic dissent, where the average Russian probably feels most offended by the reaction of the Western world, because Russia has been aggrieved, just as probably the average German in 1939 thought that, oh my God, Hitler was the man of peace. In every public speech he had given, he had emphasized his commitment to peace. And it's quite interesting to read the Hitler speeches, if you can do this to yourself, of the 1930s. He is presenting himself as the man of negotiations and the man of peace, and was believed not just inside Germany, it was believed elsewhere too. Why was he believed? Because people wanted to believe him, because everything else was just too horrible to contemplate. And, he's spouting peace.
Difference in ideology and culture led to colonial groups believing that they were being treated as inferior by their European overlords. With the Americans and the British colonies feeling particularly violated, the colonists believed that the raise and institution of the new taxes onto the American people were not legal, as they were instituted without the American voice in the matter. This would come to lead to the American War of Independence, or better known as the American Revolutionary War. The firearms that the soldiers and revolutionaries used were muskets. Smallpox, however, was a more effective killer than the weaponry throughout the war. 17,000 people would die of disease, while only 6,800 would be killed in action. More people were killed by the smallpox outbreak alone than by traditional firearms throughout the entire war. In regards to the Spanish, these European settlers within the New World had killed 56 million indigenous peoples of the Americas. This was in course with the Spanish conquest from the lands of Greater Louisiana to Cape Horn. The mass genocides had led to colder winters, frosty summers, and failing harvests for the people of the world. This was the first case of a major shift in greenhouse gases in human history. This led to major amounts of racism and crimes against the indigenous population in the future, as well as affecting the poor peasants of the world who had little access to food before the mini ice age.
Now we're getting into the real conversation. Which wars are just and which ones are about personal gain?
Ideology continues to be a drive for American involvement in wars, but further pushed with revenge, especially in the Middle East. The War on Terror is a series of campaigns led by the United States after the attack on the World Trade Centers on September 11, 2001. President George W. Bush had started the campaign in hopes to destroy terrorism and all of the governments and peoples that supported terrorism or the terrorists running the organizations. Another cause for the U.S. being involved in current wars is for economic benefit and access to resources, especially in the oil-rich Middle East. As previously seen in past American military involvement, wars make money. And while these events didn't necessarily take place in the Americas, they were inflicted upon the Middle East by the United States. In the near future, or far away from now, America may seek to get involved in other small conflicts around the world, especially in the areas rich in resources. Remember, wars are retold by the victors, so the American view is different from the view of the lands that are affected. Ideology and difference in governments has been a cause for war since the Cold War. The U.S. has stayed defiant against communism, and should Russia further escalate the war on Ukraine by attacking a NATO country, we could see the U.S. most likely getting involved.
With fascism growing in the European theater from leaders like Adolf Hitler and Benito Mussolini, an emperor would desire conquest in hopes of becoming equal on the world stage. Emperor Hirohito, with Commander Hideki Tojo, would devise a plan for the invasion of the splintered Chinese states in order to grow their power and their desire for natural resources. The Chinese were seen as inferior, therefore Japanese people did not see this as a crime. This would lead to Japanese experimenting on the native Asian and Oceanic populations through brutal experiments that treated the people as if they were not human. Geography would also be a major reason for Japan's invasion, as Japanese troops would invade through the region of Manchuria south into China, as well as naval invasions of the coast. Religious reasons would also be a major drive for war in Asia, especially when Iraq invaded Iran in 1980 to try to stop the spread of the Shia revolution to Iraq, as it would have been possible to lead to the overthrow of the Sunni leader Saddam Hussein. The conflict lasted until 1987, when the UN issued Resolution 598 calling for the ceasefire and all prisoners being returned. The Middle East would continue to be ravaged by war all the way to present day, especially in Iraq, Iran, and Afghanistan, all of which causes can be linked to revenge and differing ideologies, whether those be through religion or government. In the future, the Middle East and Asia will most likely continue to fight wars over different ideologies such as communism versus democracy, and most likely continue to fight for resources. As we are seeing with Ukraine and Russia, a major drive for the conflict is Russia's need for resources and the want to restore Russia to the former glory of the USSR. In other regions, due to the Russo-Ukrainian conflict, it is possible now more than ever that China makes an effort to end the civil war that has been raging since before World War II. With Western hands tied, it is possible that a Chinese invasion of Taiwan could lead to a third world war or the subjugation of 34 million people forced to endure the communist systems of the People's Republic of China. Nationalistic and more so unifying ideas can also be good in certain ways. Looking at the Arab Spring, many citizens under corrupt regimes unified together to overthrow their governments. Now looking at how the Syrian revolt had sparked a decades-long civil war, is this one of the examples where war was the only option after years of oppression?
Well, one would always hope that diplomacy could be used, unfortunately. That would always be the best option. But unfortunately, often when particularly things that degenerate into civil wars are about very strongly held beliefs, usually involving minority versus majority kinds of, who feel that there is no other option except force because they've tried other things.
In other cases, however, wars may not be generally justified, especially depending on the point of view.
If you were to travel back into the late 12th century or the 13th century and ask the Crusaders, so, while you're on your way to the Holy Land, is what you're doing just? And you say, of course.
But as we bring it back to the present day and try to theorize why we are still fighting wars and continuing to make the same mistakes, it becomes clear that we are doing something deliberately wrong when it comes to handling conflicts. If we look at the Cold War, instead of de-escalation, we egged each other on. In the War on Terror, we tore apart the Middle East, and now with present conflicts, we are glorifying war.
Unfortunately, you're not going to be able to get away from it because people love that sensation. They love that big flashy, oh shit, this is what's going on. And until human nature itself changes, you're not going to be able to get away from it.
Notice what happened in this country after the Soviet Union collapsed. While the Soviet Union and the Soviet Empire was still in place in Eastern Europe, people of my generation were incredibly alert to what was happening in Poland, what was happening in Hungary, and what was happening in Czechoslovakia. And every little, stirring which caused the harumphing, the disfavor of the Communist Party was greeted in.
But after the fall of the Soviet Union, there was general disinterest in the West for anything that came out of Russia. But why does this matter? Why do we still fight? And how does the glorification of war prohibit us from peace?
Unfortunately, like I said earlier, war is a necessity. Whether it would be a dictator trying to take what isn't his, or someone fighting back to protect their own, it's still going to be there. The after effects have changed names from battlefield fatigue, shell shock, PTSD. They're all the same thing. They've all been through history, and there's never been a good way to actually treat or solve it.
I'm teaching a Vietnam War class right now, and that's the question everybody always wants to know is, how do we not learn? And I think there's a couple of answers and one of them is, we've had this tendency throughout history, because history is told historically from the standpoint of the victor, right? Mm-hmm. And so we tend to glorify war. and always have.
So we've realized one of the main causes of the continuation of war, but how would we stop it? We would need to start identifying other countries and actually getting to know how they are made up.
We have this kind of amnesia where, the headline gets rolled out, everybody's mesmerized by it, and then 15 minutes later, we've forgotten this. So we need more country experts. And I don't care what the country is, Bolivia or Botswana or Burma or whatever. We need more people, and we need to have them funded. And if we know a little more about the outside world, we may not be able to avert wars, but we might be able to have intelligent responses.
That's the answer. Throughout all of our research and interviews, we have identified the 8 main causes of war and the sole cause for why wars continue to happen. If we stop glorifying the tragedy of war, the mass deaths and destruction, and instead focus on peace and making lasting international relations with even our enemies, we may actually achieve peace. By actually understanding our nation's neighbors and beginning to improve relations with our enemies diplomatically based on what we know about them, we can reunite the world as one whole.